January 3rd, 2026 will be remembered as the day Canada learned too late how power really works. This event needs to be understood in context if we would surgically spot the impact it really has on Canada. January 3rd, before dawn, the United States erased the Venezuelan government in a single night operation. By sunrise, President Nicolas Maduro was in American custody on his way to New York to face federal charges. President Trump called this a success. Washington celebrated. Millions of Venezuelans across the world jubilated for joy. Ottawa applauded politely from the sidelines. And that's the first fundamental problem, because this operation wasn't just about Venezuela. It was a message, and Canada was one of the intended recipients for that message. This wasn't about a regime change as usual. It wasn't humanitarian intervention. It wasn't even law enforcement. It was a reminder of who actually controls energy, who controls the market, power, geopolitics, and even the foreign policy in this entire region, and the consequences of each one of those. This time I want to show you why this single operation may have left Canada more exposed than any other moment in our modern history. And I want you to track with me here until the very end, because by the end of this dialogue this time, you will see why our greatest ally has quietly become our most dangerous economic vulnerability. If you get any value from this monologue this time, please click on the subscribe button and let's get into it. Please track with me here for a second, because I'm going to build up this story gradually. Operation Absolute Resolve didn't come out of nowhere. It was a final move in months-long campaign that most Canadians hardly even paid attention to. In late 2025, the US quietly launched Operation Southern Spear. They parked aircraft carriers in the Caribbean Sea and imposed a de facto naval blockade on Venezuela. All tankers were seized, ports were choked, pressures were applied in the entire region. The justification was simple and, in fact, legally convenient for the United States. Washington declared Venezuela a narco state. The U.S. Justice Department also labeled Maduro's inner circle as the Cartel of the Suns and designated violent gangs as foreign terrorist organizations. Now, that framing really matters. Something is labeled as a national security threat. The rules change, because this wasn't sold as humanitarian rescue. It was sold as self-defense for the United States. Then January 3rd strike became a textbook decapitation operation on Venezuela. Airstrikes neutralized command and control. Special forces extracted the head of state. The government collapsed within hours. And then came the line that should have made Ottawa, and in fact everyone, deeply uncomfortable. President Trump announced that the United States would, for a while, run Venezuela specifically to get the oil flowing. On paper, this sounds like enforcement, but in reality, it's something entirely different. And once you follow the oil, Canada's role in this story becomes really important and impossible to ignore. Again, I want you to track with me. I'm going to build up the story to a conclusive end here, because to understand the real reason for this operation, you just have to follow the oil. Venezuela sits on the world's single largest proven oil reserve, a staggering 300 billion barrels, most of it located in the Orinoco Belt. But this isn't just any kind of oil. It's heavy oil, sour crude, it's thick, high sulfur oil. It's a pain to extract, and it needs highly specialized, complex refineries to be processed into gasoline and other finished products. And where in the world do we have this concentration of those refineries? The US, the Gulf Coast, in states like Texas and Louisiana. And for decades before now, many people don't know this, Venezuela was a key supplier for many American refineries. The country's oil industry collapsed. Corruption, mismanagement, and the total lack of investment sent production spiraling down from over 3 million barrels a day to less than 1 million barrels barrels a day. As US sanctions also eventually choked off whatever was left of their production, those Gulf Coast refineries had to find a new reliable source of heavy crude. And where did they look? They looked into Canada. They found it in Alberta. Canada's oil sands produce exactly about the same type of heavy crude that comes out of Venezuela. And as Venezuela's fields failed gradually, Canada stepped up its production and became the #1 foreign oil supplier to the United States. Now that's history, and our entire energy sector pivoted now to serve the American market and built this deeply codependent relationship with the United States. The only problem here is that the entire business model by Canada was based on the assumption that Venezuela would stay a basket case forever a distressed nation. But the US just changed that script, that equation flipped overnight. This move wasn't just about getting rid of a dictator, as it were. It was about putting the world's biggest oil reserve back into play under a new management that's actually friendly to American interest. I hope you're following me here. Canada's official reaction was, to put it mildly, predictable, because on social media, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, welcomed the opportunity for freedom, democracy, and peace and prosperity for Venezuelan people. That was his tweet, pointing out that Canada hadn't recognized Maduro's regime since the bogus 2018 and 2025 elections. Our foreign affairs ministers, well, backed him up, condemned the old regime while calling for all sides to respect international law. This is classic Canadian foreign policy at work here. We've been imposing sanctions on Venezuelan officials since 2017. We helped found the Lima Group that was supposed to be the peaceful exit in Venezuela. And this is our textbook case of quiet alignment with whatever Washington wants. We saw this also in Afghanistan. We saw it in Libya. We see it in our support for Ukraine. Canada almost never breaks ranks when it comes to our alignment with the desires of Washington. But this quiet agreement hides a very uncomfortable truth, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. The American invasion of Venezuela, which Canada just endorsed, makes our country more strategically important but far less independent. Let me explain that. With Venezuela's oil supply now in chaos, those American refineries, they're more desperate than ever for Canadian heavy crude. Our strategic value here just shot through the roof momentarily. But at the same time, it exposes how vulnerable we are and how tight to the aprons of the American market we are. Our entire energy export strategy is now held hostage by one customer, one consumer, who has proven to us that it can flip our economic reality upside down with a single military operation. The stability we've counted on for generations now looks like could be gone overnight. Again, I hope you're tracking with me, because for Canada's energy sector, the fallout is in two folds. It's immediate and severe, and it's also long-term. So first, on the short-term note, it creates a dangerous sense of security around our pipelines. We're going to feel confident more and more about our pipelines, because with Venezuelan oil off of the market, stable Canadian supply would seem more critical and needed more than ever. And this makes our infrastructure, like the Trans Mountain expansion, which came online in 2024, make it look like a genius move, a timely one. But it's a trap, because it forces us to double down, invest in billions to deepen our dependence on a market that could actually vanish once Washington gets the Venezuelan oil flowing again. And I've been reading about this for the past many days. Many experts are saying it would take many years. Some say it would take a decade before the Venezuelan oil is going to flow again. Either ways, hopefully it would flow again. But this is encouraging us to dig ourselves deeper into the hole of dependence on the United States. Now, on the second note, which is the long-term version of this, it throws oil prices into complete chaos. And history shows us that once the US military intervention happens, it creates massive price swings in oil market. You take, for instance, the 2003 Iraq invasion. Instability happened, the sent prices soaring momentarily. And also after the 2011 intervention in Libya, the country's supply never really actually recovered because it baked prices permanently into the market. A US-controlled Venezuela could go either ways. Actually, I talked about this in the second part of this monologue series. The short term is the chaos that might actually spike prices for us and give Canadian revenue a nice boost, but it's going to be an illusion. But on the longer term, the idea of a 300 billion barrels of cheap, easy to ship Venezuelan oil hitting the market would kill any new investment in Alberta oil sands. Energy markets actually don't care about this kind of stability. They only care about uncertainties and they respond to that. And the US just injected a lethal dose of what could be the uncertainty right now into the most important industry in Canada, which is the energy sector. Now put the math together like this. 3 key events: the Venezuelan president deposed from office, and remember this, Trump says Canada is a competitor with the United States. Do you remember him saying that?
But we're competing for the same business. He wants to make cars, we want to make cars, and we're in competition.
He also said, I love to win. You remember that as well? Now put those 3 events together and you can try to predict the future for Canadian energy. I think that will be very important. And I think this is a comfortable spot to tell you that if you're getting any value from this analysis and this dialogue this time about Canada's energy future, can I just invite you to click on the subscribe button? That goes a long way to support the effort on the channel and it's free for you. Well, I won't take much of your time. Thank you for doing that, and let's get back into the conversation. Now, this brings us to the third consequence here, which is the complete demolition of the diversification myth that we've run on for a very long time as Canadians. For years, Canadian leaders have been talking about diversifying our energy exports away from the United States. They point to projects like the LNG Canada facility in Kitimat, which began exporting natural gas to Asia in mid-2025 as the answer. They talk about building new markets in Asia and in Europe, and Mark Carney has been talking about this since last year, especially after there was a total collapse of the negotiation of the trade and tariffs with Trump. But true diversification of our economy isn't about building one new pipeline or an LNG terminal. It's about having real autonomy. Let me explain to you why I say that. Even when we ship our resources across the Pacific, those ships travel through sea lanes controlled by the US Navy. They're sold in markets that run on US-dominated financial system. And in fact, on a US-dominated currency, there's no route to market for oil that escapes the American security umbrella. The US operation in Venezuela is the ultimate proof of all of that. It shows that America is willing to use its military, economic might to unilaterally redraw the world's energy map to serve its own interest. That's my opinion about this. Canadian leaders talk about international law and multilateralism. The United States is speaking a language of raw and pure power and control. The hard truth is that Canada's energy sector doesn't get even stronger when the world gets less stable. It only gets more exposed and more vulnerable. We get a temporary bump in relevance, but we lose whatever little independence that we had left from the past. Now, the capture of Nicolas Maduro was sold to the world as a victory for democracy and a blow against a criminal state and tyranny. I've talked about this in the past episodes in the series. Canada's leaders played their part, releasing carefully worded statements that polish our brand as a good global citizen. But the reality is much more darker and colder than that. Many great voices see Maduro's capture as justified, his indictment as human rights abuses and the mass displacement of Venezuelans across the world. The US move on Venezuela was a calculated act of geopolitical self-interest. As we all can see, it would ultimately send Canada into a wilderness of job losses as our energy sector takes the hit for it. Federal revenue will shrink, regional economies will become unstable, and our energy security perception is exposed for what it truly is in its vulnerable state. And I think this is a brutal reminder that when great powers compete, resources are what really matter. And the United States will not hesitate to do whatever it takes to secure resources. For Canada, this is a moment of reckoning. Our policy of quiet alignment has led us straight into the lion's den, into a position of profound economic vulnerability. Our most important industry now operates entirely at the mercy of the decisions made in Washington. The truth is, American power sets the board when it comes to this game, and Canada has to play whatever pieces of the puzzle that it's dealt with. Only real question: what's our next move? Will Canada seize this opportunity, this moment, to truly diversify our economy, or continue to play second fiddle to Washington's energy agenda? These are all my opinion, and I don't want you to take my word for it. Here, I actually don't try to lean either pro-Trump or pro-Maduro. I think you even need a shake in the head if you're pro-Maduro. But whatever the case is, I want to know what you think in the comment section, and I actually respond to almost all comments that go beyond slogans. So leave me your thoughts and watch the other episodes in this series where I've actually discussed other topics about the capture of Nicolas Maduro by the United States. And I want you to subscribe to the channel if you got any value from it, and I will see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.